Welcome to Not Suitable for Democracy. I'm your host, Nick, and today we're going to talk about New York City's general election happening right now, especially Zohran Mamdani potentially winning to become New York City's next mayor. Can you believe it? He's been campaigning for over a year now, and we are in the early days of early voting. Early voting is happening right now, so if you are a registered voter right here in New York City, then you are eligible to vote in this year's election. Now, aside from the mayor's race, you'll also have the opportunity to vote for comptroller, borough president, district attorney, depending on if you're in Manhattan and Brooklyn, as well as Supreme Court judge, civil court judge, and those are also based on the district you live in, but also your city council member. All 51 city council members are up for either election or re-election. We also have 6 ballot proposals. We're going to talk about them, and honestly, some of them are not suitable for democracy. Just my opinion, but at the end of the day, it is up to you to decide. And for those of you tuning in outside of New York City, I'd love to share with you my experience early voting right here in Astoria, New York. And there was also a huge rally in Forest Hills, Queens, and I'd love to share with you all about how the rally was for Zohran Mamdani and some of his closest pals like AOC and Bernie Sanders. Now, before we jump into it, I just want to remind everyone watching, thank you so much for taking the time to tune in, whether you're listening or watching on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Make sure to subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy. And you can also follow along on Instagram or TikTok at NSFD_pod. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Breaking news, we have the numbers from the first 2 days of early voting right here in New York City. Now, to give you context, the numbers are record-breaking compared to what we saw in 2021's local election. Now, that was when Mayor Adams was running for his election. So let's kind of paint the picture with some numbers. Now, the first day of early voting in 2021, we saw 15,418 ballots cast. By comparison, this time around, 79,409 ballots cast. That is 5 times the number of voters since 2021. That being said, with Mayor Adams on the ballot versus Zohran Mamdani on the ballot. Now, granted, clearly this is a more high-profile race with Zohran Mamdani, with an opponent like former Governor Cuomo, and of course, President Trump is weighing in on this election. So there are more waves being made, bringing people out to the polls. But at the end of the day, we are seeing huge turnout numbers, which is good for Zohran Mamdani. Now, after the second day of early voting, right now in New York City, the total number, it comes to 164,190 ballots cast. Get this, after the entire early voting period, after 9 days in 2021, we saw 169,486 ballots cast. So 169,000 votes over 9 days versus 164,000 over 2 days. That is the power of Zohran Mamdani, bringing people to the polls. If you want to participate in this local election and you're a registered voter in New York City, doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, independent, no party affiliation, or maybe even a member of the Working Families Party, this is your chance to make your voice heard. Now, there is a lot of information out there going on about this election, and sometimes it takes a little while to digest everything and understand and figure out what's your best candidate or your best way to vote on the ballot proposals. So, to help you out, I actually created a voter guide for New York City voters. So you'll find it right on my Instagram, which you can follow at NSFD_pod. And in the voter guide, you'll be able to see a bunch of great information. I included the voting schedule, who's on the ballot, recommendations on who to vote for, and to be clear, some of them are not suitable for democracy. So in those cases, I would prefer you write in a candidate's name. But it'll make sense once you know what district those are. So then there's also the 6 ballot proposals and my recommendations on how to vote for those. But then Outside of that, you'll also get to see voter tips and resources. This is the kind of information I'll remind you here on the podcast, but also you can dig in a little deeper on Instagram reading the voter guide. So if you haven't voted yet, I highly recommend you go sooner than later. So I went on Sunday, October 26th. I went in the morning and it was like breakfast time. So I just went along 30th Avenue here in Astoria, got myself a bagel with egg and sausage, right? Yummy little treat before I went to go vote. And, by the time I made my way down, I noticed it was like fairly empty. There were no lines outside, it was quiet, and there was one poll site worker sitting outside. And like one of the first things she said to me was, make sure to flip over your ballot for the other side to vote for the ballot proposals. That's very important. There are two sides to your ballot. A lot of people just, circle in the bubbles or fill in the bubbles on the one side. You got to do both. So if you ever get to your polling location and you want to know if it's going to be like fast or slow, you can always tell by the line outside or by how many people are inside the polling location. And this time, there were more poll site workers than actual voters. Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad because, granted, I've been at early voting times where there's lines out the door, and there's been times where you have to like even wait to vote. Not ideal, but even so, it's never like too long. Fortunately, with New York City, with early voting, you're not really waiting, more than like 20 minutes. And this morning, I was very lucky. I didn't have to wait at all. I did not need a form of identification because I already registered to vote in New York, right? They use your ID when you first register. But since I already registered, I've been a registered voter for over 10 years now, I definitely don't need my ID when voting in New York City. So, easy enough. I was able to just tell them, basically that basic info. Then they gave me my ballot. And they gave me a stylus that also works as a pen. The stylus has you sign your name on the iPad screen to check in, and then the pen is used to actually fill in the bubble to cast your vote. Now, other jurisdictions around the country do it differently. Some have like a punch-in, some you got to pull the lever. But for New York City, we have to pen and paper fill in the bubble. Outside of that, I was quickly whisked away to a little voting booth, right? So I had the privacy. Now I knew exactly who I was voting for and what I'd vote for the ballot proposals, which I highly, highly recommend. Whenever you're voting, please don't wait until the last minute. Save yourself and everyone else the time. Make those decisions beforehand. Now I know some people like to wait till the last minute. Some people don't really think about voting until you're at the booth. I highly recommend you do not do that. And I know these are important decisions. I know you want to take your time to do that, but just please, 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 I urge everyone to make that decision before you get there so then you can save us all the time and just make a pleasant voting experience for everyone. Okay, so once I filled out all my bubbles, I knew who I was voting for, slipped in my ballot. Now, just to be prefaced, I should have mentioned, there's actually two ballots, like two long sheets of paper, filled out both sides, back and front of each one, and it had to slip in at the poll site counter. You slide it into the machine. You got to do each page separate. So I slid the first one in when I voted for Zohran. He was the first vote, and then the second page, and that was it. And then he walked out of there happy as can be, and then just walked on home. So it was so great just to have just a nice experience. I did it myself. It was easy to do. Everyone was very kind and polite at the polling location. I had no problems. But in case you do, there is a number you can call. It is actually the election hotline that is from the New York State Attorney General's office. Now, problems that may arise, just in case, right? Maybe a poll site worker was trying to shoo you away from the poll, even though you knew that you were a registered voter. Or maybe they were trying to say polls are closed today, or you can't vote for whatever reason. Those issues have happened. I've actually experienced that myself with people telling me from the Democratic primary that even though they registered to vote as a Democrat, they were turned away from the polls. So I heard their story. Actually did call the election hotline myself, and I did submit the complaint. They're very courteous. They're very kind and understanding. You want to make sure that you have as much information as possible when calling. Make sure you have the poll site location. If you have the address, even better. If not, no big deal. They have it in their system. Try to be as detailed as possible, saying like what happened, what the issue was, and like why. And basically like really make the case of like, hey, this is important. This is your vote, right? Like the more you take these complaints seriously, this is how we also create a culture that values our democracy. So now I'm not saying everyone needs to call the election hotline for every little thing. Sometimes like small mistakes happen. They don't need a hotline request or complaint. But, if it is a more serious allegation, then definitely take it on your behalf. There's the phone number you can call. I'm going to share it here. It's on the website, but nonetheless, you can call the election hotline at 866 390 2992. That is the number you'll need in case anything happens at your polling location during early voting hours or during election day. Another example may be if you see someone with election intimidation, right? You see people outside the polling place that are maybe Trump supporters or whoever. Things do happen. So you just want to make sure you're alert, look around, stay informed, and be safe. Normally, it's not a huge deal in New York City, but hey, you never know. But I guess my point is, right, the more we get involved and the more we talk about, the more we talk about our experiences with voting, right, we begin to normalize it, create a culture that supports democracy, especially at a time when it's going to be overtaken by some authoritarian regime. Let's make sure that we hold on to it, protect it, and make it a part of our everyday life so that we can essentially keep it as a part of the true American tradition of democracy. Now let's review the 6 ballot proposals. I know this can get a little wonky, so let's try to breeze through it just so you have a pretty quick high-level understanding and ready to move on. Okay, so ballot proposal 1. This is actually a statewide ballot proposal, so everyone across the state will be voting on this. And basically, this is an amendment to the state constitution. This is asking to allow an Olympic sports complex in Essex County to be built on state forest preserve land. Now, right now, the current sports complex is not meeting the environmental protection clause within the state's constitution, so it's actually breaking the rules. Now, this amendment would allow the sports complex to make the upgrades necessary to stay in compliance. However, because it will be taking up over 1,039 acres of land, that's going to be destroying a bunch of, state preserved land. So within this amendment, it also includes a requirement to include 2,500 new acres of protected forest. So while they have to, I don't want to say destroy, but while they have to use 1,039 acres, this will require them to preserve new and more land, 2,500 acres. So that's actually a good thing. Long story short, I'll be voting no on this proposal. As much as I appreciate them looking to stay in compliance, I personally don't think it is the best use of our tax dollars to be creating more ski trails. I'm not a skier, not for me. If enough people in New York State want it, feel free to vote yes. But for me personally, I'll be voting no. Okay, so long story short, if you're interested in researching ballot proposals 2 through 4, you'll have the opportunity to research those using my voter guide, where it shares the actual language used for the ballot proposals and the recommendations on how to vote for them. So really quickly, ballot proposal number 2, fast track affordable housing. Ballot proposal 3, simplify the review process for modest housing and infrastructure projects. And ballot proposal number 4, creating an affordable housing appeals board with council, borough, and citywide representation. Now, while that all sounds great, essentially all 3 of them do redefine the process for, creating affordable housing, which is a good thing. However, all of them use this mechanism by removing the city council's final decision or removing city council's negotiation power within those processes. Now, the city council, we vote them in on our behalf, so that is the closest tie we have to community input. And honestly, the city council does a decent job adding more units of affordable housing or negotiating on behalf of their communities and their districts. So the fact that we're looking, or these ballot proposals 2 through 4, look to remove city council representation, that's not suitable for democracy. So I do not recommend voting for ballot proposal 2, 3, and 4. I would vote no. As for ballot proposal 5 and 6, simply put, I'll be voting yes. Here's why. So for ballot proposal 5, it creates a digital map to modernize our city maps. Since it was mandated in the city charter in 1989, the year Taylor Swift was born, that is how old these maps have been in use. But let's be real, it's 2025 and it's time to modernize our maps with the technology we have at hand. Ballot proposal 6, this would move local elections in New York City to coincide with presidential elections in the even-numbered years. So as I mentioned before, we have the mayoral election and local elections, 2021, 2025. Well, this ballot proposal would start to move them to the even-numbered presidential years, such as 2020, 2024, and so on. Now, personally, there's a lot of discussion going on around this. I would love to dive deeper in a later podcast, so stay tuned. But for now, just know that this ballot proposal aims to encourage higher turnout, stronger voter participation, and it does cut down to the number of times you have to go out to the polls and vote. So for me, that is a win. On its surface, I support it, and I recommend voting yes. Now, as for the cons and the drawbacks, I understand, especially within the organizer community. So while it's supposed to cut down on voter fatigue, we also know it's going to make these local races more competitive when trying to capture attention with the high-profile national, federal races and presidential races. So no matter your thoughts, however you feel, I recommend voting yes. Because here's the thing, it's not going to go into effect overnight. So with ballot proposal number 6, this one will take some time before it even goes into effect, if ever. So first step is this ballot proposal. If it passes with a simple majority, 50% plus 1 vote, then it goes on to the next step. The next step is that ballot proposal 6 would then have to be passed by the state legislature in 2 consecutive sessions. When they come into session in 2026, that's the first round. Then they'll have to do it again in the next legislative session. So it will take time before we can actually confirm that this ballot proposal 6 is even making its way to become a reality. The final hurdle before it becomes a reality is it will then need to go to a statewide vote. So even though we're voting on it now in New York City as a ballot proposal, after 2 legislative sessions getting voted on and passed again by simple majorities, it will then have to get voted on across the entire state. All of New York State will have to vote on it, even if it only affects New York City. And that's because it would be an amendment to the state constitution, and any changes to the state constitution have to be put up to a vote by everyone in the state. So that being said, we're not going to see this happen by 2028, so don't worry, there's plenty of time, but we may see it happen in the future. So maybe my opinion could be swayed, maybe more information will come to light, but at this point, I encourage you to vote yes on ballot proposal 6, and we still have plenty of time to decide before the final statewide vote, if it even makes it that far. And there you have it. Those are the 6 ballot proposals. Really simply, I recommend voting no on proposals 1 through 4, and I recommend voting yes on 5 and 6. Again, feel free to vote for all of them, none of them, up to you, but I do recommend you consider voting for each of them, whether it's yes or no. That's up to you, because at least making your voice heard, that is suitable for democracy. So in case you weren't fired up to vote for Zohran Mamdani already, just wait until you have the chance to watch the rally, New York is Not for Sale rally, that Zohran Mamdani hosted right here in Queens. Now, it was at Forest Hill Stadium, which is actually not too far from Astoria, and Zohran Mamdani had a ton of people there. Not only did he have several New Yorkers who spoke on his behalf, including elected officials, labor leaders, and the New York governor, Kathy Hochul, and the leader of the assembly and the leader of the state senate, right? Some big names that are coming out in full support of Zohran Mamdani on a Sunday night in the cold. So, that being said, there were 50,000 people in attendance at Forest Hill Stadium to watch Zohran Mamdani and all those people speak. Now, what made this rally so fun was that they even had hosts like Sarah Sherman, who is a SNL cast member, and she did a really great job keeping the energy up and keeping the LOLs coming. So I didn't catch the entire rally, but I knew Breadlander spoke, who did a good job. There was a choir there who sang and kept the energy going, and I was actually really impressed with 3 speakers. It was New York Governor Kathy Hochul, the State Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie, and the State Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins. Now, those 3 have all worked with Cuomo, and I have to say they all gave such rousing speeches in support of Zohran. I think they all endorsed him too. So the fact that they're all coming out in full support on the heels, mind you, of former Governor Cuomo currently using Islamophobic and racist attacks against Zohran Mamdani lately. Now, the first person who spoke out of that trio was actually the New York Governor, Kathy Hochul. But one of the last line or two of her speech, elect Zohran and save the country. She did a really good job casting Donald Trump as the opposition, which clearly he's trying to meddle in this primary and general election. So now, saying that, so I am so shocked to hear the typically moderate governor of New York coming out, not only endorsing Zohran, but at this rally in front of 10,000 people, go on to say, elect Zohran Mamdani and save the country. That is huge to equate the two as 2 equally important objectives, not only for a local mayor's race, but also for a national cry for leadership. That is a rallying cry that, I don't think I've heard many elected officials really praise someone on that level. But elect Zohran and save the country, that hit me so hard because we rarely, if ever, see moderates support Democratic Socialists like that, especially when House Speaker Hakeem Jeffries finally endorsed Zohran Mamdani late on Friday, October 24th. It's kind of funny because now we're at a point where Hakeem needed Mamdani more than Mamdani needed Hakeem. It's crazy how it works out, but it's Zohran should be so proud of the movement he built, which not only changed the New York City electorate, but it's literally changing national politics. Bringing it back to Hochul, elect Zohran, save the country, that is a message to the Democratic establishment, whether you like it or not. Zohran is going to be a national figurehead. So once he gets elected, that is unimaginable power, being probably the highest profile position in the country next to president and vice president, is the mayor of New York City, the nation's largest city, which also, as Zohran has pointed out plenty of times, the wealthiest city in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. So the fact that a Democratic Socialist, progressive, immigrant, Muslim candidate for mayor is about to win as the Democratic nominee is going to make history. Whether you like it or not, it is. And that sentiment was echoed by AOC when she gave a rousing speech, not only grounding us in the fact that we are home to the Statue of Liberty, where immigrants are welcome here and people are treated with dignity. So she actually called out President Trump, saying that we set the bar, New York City sets the standard, and America rises to the bar that we set right here in New York City. Because New Yorkers are tough and we fight back. She made that so clear in her speech. Not only was it great for her as a member of Congress, but even as a potential senator and as a potential presidential candidate. Whatever she chooses for 2028, I think she's probably going to run for Senate. But at the end of the day, she is positioning herself so well to run for higher office, and this speech proved it. And Bernie had a great speech. He stayed true to his own message about affordability and how, as an electorate, we can transform our country by staying true to our values, especially when fighting for policies like Medicare for all, immigration reform. He also is talking about how we must fight the oligarchy. Zohran's been doing that so well, and Bernie's speech also focused on how we need to fight the oligarchy through President Trump, through the billionaires, through the media, the consulting class, and those who are really casting doubt on Zohran's campaign. But the great thing is that he knows, and what he shared is that we have the people. We have the power. So we have to stand united and fight against the oligarchy and all of their hatred that they will use to divide us in order to truly win a working class vision for this country and especially for New York City. And lastly, in a nearly 30-minute speech, Zohran Mamdani took to the stage with thundering applause and cheers, focusing on his campaign, affordability, and the values that he brings to the table as a democratic socialist, as a progressive candidate for New York City mayor, but more so as a national figure calling out Trump, the corruption, the billionaires, and all the haters who are looking to tear him down. He called it out how, these haters are going to be trying to attack his campaign in every conceivable way imaginable, not only in the last few days of this election, but in the next few months and years to come. They are looking to take down anyone who challenges the status quo and anyone who challenges their quest for power. Really shedding a light on the injustices that we face every day as New Yorkers, not only from the bureaucracy here, but also from the Trump administration, right? Zohran knows that we must fight President Trump and not back down. He even called out former Governor Cuomo, basically calling him a puppet, and President Trump calling him a puppet master. So the fact that Zohran is unafraid to go after these two, egotistical, crazy, Queens boys, right? It's good to see that type of fight and energy, especially in someone like Zohran. So lastly, I really loved how Zohran ended his speech with a quote from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who, as we know, was a strong fighter and a huge champion for the working class and has made his name in the history books within the Democratic Party and American history. So he goes on to say that almost 89 years to the day where Zohran had the rally to when FDR had a rally at Madison Square Garden. He was basically saying how when he won his first term in office, the forces of selfishness and lust for power met their match. And then in FDR's second term, the forces of selfishness and lust for power met their master. So what Zohran had seen and said, that during his campaign for mayor, he has seen the forces of selfishness and lust of power meet their match. And when Zohran becomes mayor, the forces of selfishness and the lust for power will have met their master, Mayor Mamdani. That was such a powerful moment. The crowd was so bright-eyed and so excited because we know when Zohran becomes the mayor, it is up to all of us to keep that legacy and organizing power going because we are the change that we will see. I hope you're as excited as I am. I voted for Zohran Mamdani already. I hope you do too. So with that said, it's up to you and me and all of us to usher in this next chapter of change so we can truly fight for a progressive future we deserve. And that's our show. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you heard and want to learn more, then make sure to subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Or you can follow along on Instagram and TikTok. I use the same handle for both, so you can follow at NSFD_pod. If you're registered to vote in New York City, make sure you cast your ballot now at the time of this recording through November 2nd for early voting, or you can vote in person on Election Day, Tuesday, November 4th. And one more note, stay tuned for next week's episode being released on Wednesday, November 5th. This will give us some time to film the episode, talk about the election results, and give you the most up-to-date information. I'll be releasing next week's episode on Wednesday, November 5th. So stay tuned for Not Suitable for Democracy on Wednesday. Then after that, we'll resume to weekly episodes, brand new every Tuesday. And make your voice heard in this year's general election. Because remember, democracy is not suitable without you.